Arsenal. From their humble beginnings as a factory team to becoming the Invincibles. From lifting league titles at Anfield to enduring years in the wilderness, Arsenal has seen it all. But before we talk about their legendary past, let's talk about where Arsenal stands right now. Because after years of struggle, the Gunners are firing again. But can they stay at the top? Or is this just another false dawn? Let's find out. If you like these videos, please subscribe and check out our membership page. Thanks, guys. For years, Arsenal fans have asked the same question. Are we back? And every time, the answer has been just out of reach. A promising run, a title challenge that falls short, moments of brilliance overshadowed by inconsistency. But this season, Mikel Arteta's side has evolved. They sit second in the points table so far. Gone are the days of naive, beautiful football with no end product. They've already taken down major rivals, shown composure in tough matches, and proven they can grind out results. But the biggest test? The final stretch of the season? Can they hold their nerve when it really matters? And here's something that makes this Arsenal team special. It feels like a return to the club's golden days. It echoes the best of Wenger's era. Speaking of which, let's rewind to where it all began, and as the story progresses, we'll talk more about their prime, the downfall, and the rebuild. It was 1886, and in the heart of Woolwich, a cluster of armament factory workers at the Royal Arsenal decided to form a team. They called themselves Dial Square, named after a workshop in the factory. A few weeks later, they settled on a new name, Royal Arsenal. Now, here's something you might not know. Arsenal were pioneers from the very start. By 1891, they became the first London club to turn professional. But ambition came at a cost. Financial struggles mounted, and by 1910, the club was on the verge of collapse. This is where fate and a man named Henry Norris stepped in. In 1913, he made a decision that changed everything. Arsenal moved north to Highbury. Just like that, they left their South London roots behind and planted their flag in the heart of North London. It was a gamble, a club with no real fan base in the area, trying to carve out its new identity in a new home. And just when it seemed like Arsenal was ready to take the next step, football was put on hold. World War I halted the sport, but behind the scenes, Norris was making moves. When football resumed in 1919, Arsenal somehow found themselves promoted to the first division under controversial circumstances. Officially, it was a restructuring of the league. Unofficially, well, let's just say some eyebrows were raised. But Arsenal were in the top flight, and they would never look back. If you had to pinpoint the moment Arsenal went from just another football club to a true powerhouse, look no further than Herbert Chapman. When he arrived in 1925, Arsenal had never won a league title. But Chapman wasn't just here to win. He was here to change football itself, and that's exactly what he did. First, he revolutionized tactics. Back then, most teams played with a rigid 2-3-5 formation, but Chapman saw an opportunity. He introduced the WM formation, shifting an extra defender back and giving his team more balance. It was a tactical masterstroke, turning Arsenal into an attacking force with defensive solidity. And the results? They were spectacular. In 1930, Arsenal won their first ever major trophy, the FA Cup, defeating Huddersfield Town, ironically Chapman's former club. That was just the beginning. What followed was pure dominance. League titles in 1931, 1933, 34, 35, and 1938. Arsenal had become the first true giants of English football, playing in front of packed crowds at Highbury, led by legendary names like Alex James, Cliff Baston, and Eddie Hapgood. But just when Arsenal looked unstoppable, tragedy struck. In 1934, Chapman suddenly passed away from pneumonia. And here's the thing, this was only the beginning. When the dust settled after World War II, Arsenal were still champions on paper, having won the league in 1938. But the war had drained the squad, Highbury had been damaged by bombing raids, and the football world was shifting. Under Tom Whittaker, Arsenal wasted no time reclaiming their status, winning the First Division title in 1948 and again in 1953 in dramatic fashion. These were the last echoes of the Chapman era, with players like Joe Mercer and Cliff Holton leading the way. But then, silence. The rest of the 1950s and 60s were frustrating for Arsenal fans. While Manchester United, Liverpool, and Tottenham surged ahead, Arsenal faded into the background. The worst part? The football was uninspiring. By the late 1960s, Arsenal weren't just trophyless, they weren't even relevant. And then in 1966, they made a bold appointment. Bertie Mee, a former physiotherapist with no managerial experience, took charge. It seemed like a gamble. But what happened next? That was something special, because Arsenal were about to rise again. It started with the 1970 Intercities Fairs Cup, Arsenal's first European trophy. After losing the first leg 3-1 to Anderlecht, Arsenal produced a stunning comeback at Highbury, winning 3-0 to lift the cup. It wasn't the league title fans craved, but it was proof that this team had something special. And then came 1971, the year Arsenal truly arrived. Led by a squad of warriors, Frank McClintock, Charlie George, Ray Kennedy, and George Graham, Arsenal went on a relentless title charge, clinching the First Division crown with a dramatic 1-0 win at White Hart Lane. Winning the title at the home of their fiercest rivals, that's the stuff of legends. But they weren't done yet. Days later, Arsenal faced Liverpool in the FA Cup final. After a grueling battle, the game went to extra time. Then, in the 111th minute, Charlie George, arms stretched out, lying on the Wembley grass, scored the winner. Arsenal had done the impossible, the league and FA Cup double. For the first time since the Chapman era, Arsenal were kings of England. By the late 70s, Arsenal found themselves in another final, the 1979 FA Cup against Manchester United. And this one was unforgettable. Arsenal led 2-0 with minutes to go, only for United to score twice in 2 minutes. It looked like Arsenal had thrown it all away. But then, almost instantly from the restart, Alan Sunderland popped up at the back post to score the winner, 3-2. Wembley erupted. The 5-minute final became one of the most dramatic endings in FA Cup history. If the 1970s gave Arsenal their first taste of modern success, the 1980s tested their patience. At the start of the decade, Arsenal had a chance to return to glory. They reached the 1980 FA Cup final and the Cup Winners' Cup final, but heartbreak followed. A painful defeat to West Ham at Wembley and a gut-wrenching penalty shootout loss to Valencia in Europe left Arsenal empty-handed. It was a crushing blow. The club drifted through the mid-80s with inconsistency. Then, in 1986, Arsenal made a decision that would change their future. They appointed George Graham, a former Arsenal player with a strict no-nonsense approach. And in just a few years, he turned Arsenal into a force once again. By 1987, Arsenal lifted the League Cup, their first trophy in 8 years. And then, in 1989, came one of the greatest moments in English football history, Anfield '89. Needing to beat Liverpool by 2 goals on the final day of the season, Arsenal pulled off the impossible. With just seconds left, Michael Thomas broke through and slotted home the title-winning goal. Arsenal were champions. And just like that, they were back. The early 90s brought more success, including another league title in '91 and the famous 1993 Domestic Cup double. But by the mid-90s, Arsenal had hit a ceiling. The game was changing, and George Graham's defensive style was starting to look outdated. The club needed a fresh vision, a manager who could revolutionize Arsenal the way Chapman once had. And in 1996, that man arrived. Enter Arsene Wenger. When Arsenal announced Wenger's appointment in 1996, the English press mocked the decision. Arsene who ran the headlines? After all, this was an unknown French manager coming from Japan's Nagoya Grampus 8, not exactly the high-profile name fans were expecting. But Wenger wasn't here to be ordinary. Wenger arrived in October 1996, inheriting a squad with strong defensive foundations but lacking attacking flair. His first move? Revolutionizing Arsenal's fitness, diet, and training methods. Players like Tony Adams, Lee Dixon, and Martin Keown, who had been part of Arsenal's hard-drinking past, were suddenly in the best shape of their careers. On the pitch, Wenger brought an attacking philosophy. Arsenal finished third in the league, missing out on the Champions League by goal difference. But 1997-98 was the season Arsenal truly became Wenger's team. He made two crucial signings, Marc Overmars and Emmanuel Petit, who joined an already talented squad featuring Dennis Bergkamp, Ian Wright, and Patrick Vieira. But early on, it looked like another Manchester United title. By Christmas, Arsenal trailed them by 11 points. And then came the run. Arsenal went on a 10-game winning streak, tearing through the league with a blend of attacking brilliance and defensive solidity. The key moment? A 1-0 win over Manchester United at Old Trafford, with Overmars scoring the winner. That night, everyone knew Arsenal were serious. They clinched the Premier League title with 2 games to spare, but they weren't done yet. In the FA Cup final, Arsenal faced Newcastle. Bergkamp pulled the strings, Overmars scored, and Nicolas Anelka sealed the 2-0 victory. Arsenal had done the double. Wenger had achieved in 2 years what took most managers decades. This was just the beginning. Arsene Wenger had taken English football by storm, but one man wasn't impressed: Sir Alex Ferguson. Manchester United had ruled the 90s, and now Wenger was threatening their empire. What followed was one of the greatest rivalries in football history. It was a clash of ideologies. Ferguson's United played aggressive, relentless football. Wenger's Arsenal were all about technique, speed, and finesse. Every time they met, it was war. Fresh off their double-winning season, Arsenal wanted to defend their crown in the 1998-99 season, but Ferguson had other plans. The season came down to the FA Cup semi-final replay, one of the greatest games in English football history. With the score at 1-1 in extra time, Dennis Bergkamp stepped up for a last-minute penalty. A goal would send Arsenal to the final. He missed. Seconds later, Ryan Giggs picked up the ball in his own half, dribbled past 4 Arsenal defenders, and smashed it into the net. Arsenal's dreams were shattered. United went on to win the treble. In the next season, Wenger responded by signing Thierry Henry, a young winger from Juventus. At first, he struggled. "I thought I'd made a mistake coming here," Henry later admitted, but Wenger saw something special. He transformed Henry into a striker, and slowly the goals started to flow. Despite this, Arsenal couldn't stop United, who ran away with the title. The Gunners finished second, 18 points behind. It was a tough lesson, and I guess Arsenal is still learning because they can't stop finishing second. Back to the story. Arsenal had the legendary back four: Dixon, Adams, Keown, and Winterburn. But now he had something else, a devastating attack. And in 2001, Wenger signed Sol Campbell from Tottenham on a free transfer, one of the most controversial signings in history. 2001-02 was the season Arsenal overtook United. From start to finish, they were unstoppable. Henry was now the best striker in England. Pirdes and Ljungberg dominated the wings. Vieira bossed the middle. Campbell and Keown locked down the defense. And then, on May 8, 2002, Arsenal went to Old Trafford. Win, and they'd be champions. With United pressing, Sylvain Wilfred pounced on a rebound and slotted the ball past Fabian Barthez. 1-0 Arsenal. They held on. The final whistle blew. Arsenal had won the Premier League at Old Trafford. They finished the season unbeaten away from home, a sign of things to come. To top it off, they won the FA Cup, beating Chelsea 2-0. Another double, but this was just the warm-up. After conquering England, Arsenal aimed to defend their Premier League title. They started the 2002-03 season on fire, going 30 games unbeaten across all competitions, with Thierry Henry reaching new heights. In September, Arsenal went to Ellen Road and tore apart Leeds United 4-1, with Henry scoring a hat-trick. In March, he produced one of the greatest individual performances ever seen: 4 goals against Leeds at Highbury, leaving the crowd in disbelief. But Arsenal lost focus. A shocking 2-2 draw against Bolton late in the season allowed Manchester United to take the lead. Just like in 1999, Ferguson's men snatched the title away. Arsenal had to settle for second. However, there was a silver lining. They won the FA Cup, beating Southampton 1-0 in the final thanks to a goal from Robert Pirdes. But for Wenger, this wasn't enough. He wanted more. And in 2003-04, Arsenal didn't just win more. Every great team in history has a defining season. For Wenger's Arsenal, this was it. At the start of the season, Wenger made a bold prediction. We can go the entire season unbeaten. The media laughed. No team had done that in over 100 years. Can Arsenal? Before we get to the results, let's first talk about the core of the Invincibles. Thierry Henry scoring 39 goals in all competitions. Patrick Vieira was the heart of the midfield. Robert Pires and Freddie Ljungberg, the wide men, cutting inside and creating havoc. Dennis Bergkamp, the magician. Ashley Cole and Lauren, the fearless fullback. Sol Campbell and Kolo Touré, the unbreakable defensive wall. And Jens Lehmann, the unpredictable but brilliant goalkeeper. From the first match, Arsenal played like men possessed. Let's have a look at the key matches of the Invincible season. On November 2003, Arsenal went to the San Siro and destroyed Inter Milan, a 5-1 away win against one of Italy's greatest clubs. Henry ran riot, scoring twice and assisting 2 more. With Chelsea rising under Roman Abramovich's billions, Arsenal needed to put them in their place. Vieira and Edu scored in a dominant 2-1 win, keeping their unbeaten run alive. But the Liverpool game in April 2004 was special. After going 2-1 down at halftime, Thierry Henry produced a legendary hat-trick, including that iconic solo goal, gliding past defenders like they didn't exist. By the time they faced Tottenham at White Hart Lane, history was within reach. A 2-2 draw was enough. Arsenal had won the Premier League at the home of their fiercest rivals. But the real achievement? They finished the entire season unbeaten. 26 wins, 12 draws, 0 defeats. No team has done it since. The Invincibles were immortalized. Winning the league without losing a single game was an impossible act to follow. Arsenal started the 2004-05 season still unbeaten, extending their record to 49 games without a defeat. But in October, they faced Manchester United at Old Trafford. It was one of the most infamous matches in Premier League history. United played dirty. They hacked down Arsenal's players at every opportunity. The game was tight until Wayne Rooney won a controversial penalty. Ruud van Nistelrooy converted. Rooney added a second. Arsenal's unbeaten run was over. The Invincibles had fallen, and with Chelsea rising under Jose Mourinho, Arsenal struggled to compete. They finished second in the league but managed to win the FA Cup, beating United on penalties in the final. It was a small consolation, but something felt different. The golden era was fading. Vieira left for Juventus. The squad was aging, and Arsenal's financial limitations were becoming clear. The transition was evident. Gone were the legends of Vieira, Bergkamp, and Ljungberg. In came players like Chase Fabregas, Robin van Persie, and Emmanuel Abue. But the 2005-06 season brought a glimmer of hope. Arsenal had a deep run in the UEFA Champions League, something fans could only dream of in the Premier League's tough environment. They reached the final, facing Barcelona in Paris. It was supposed to be a moment of glory for Arsenal. They were leading 1-0 thanks to Sol Campbell's header. But as the game wore on, fatigue and Barcelona's brilliance came to the forefront. In the final 15 minutes, Barcelona scored twice, and Arsenal's dream was crushed. 2-1 defeat. Wenger's young team showed they could compete with Europe's elite. The problem? They didn't win. And that was the story of these years. Close, but never quite enough. In 2006, Arsenal made a historic move, leaving Highbury, their home for 93 years, and moving into the brand new Emirates Stadium. The move also came with its own set of challenges. Financially, it stretched the club. Arsenal finished 4th in the Premier League. There were thrilling moments like Van Persie's goals and a last-minute 2-1 win over Manchester United, but they fell short in the league and in Europe. Arsenal's 2007-08 season was arguably the closest they came to winning the Premier League in the post-Invincibles era. In the first half of the season, Arsenal were unstoppable. Arsenal surged to the top of the table, but it all came crashing down. A combination of injuries, a lack of depth, and some poor results led to Arsenal slipping in the second half of the season. A heartbreaking 2-2 draw at Tottenham in April saw their title challenge unravel. In the end, they finished 3rd behind Manchester United and Chelsea. Wenger was forced to sell some of his best players to balance the books. The most devastating loss came in 2009 when Emmanuel Adebayor and Kolo Touré were sold to Manchester City. 2009-2010 was another year of heartbreak. Arsenal finished third in the Premier League but were never really in the title race after December. Despite the promise of youth, Jack Wilshere, Theo Walcott, and Samir Nasri, Arsenal still lacked the squad depth to compete with United and Chelsea. In Europe, the season was even more painful. Arsenal were knocked out of the Champions League by Barcelona in the quarterfinals after a thrilling 2-2 draw at the Nou Camp. The next few years were a blur of near misses. The 2010-11 Arsenal finished fourth in the Premier League, again behind Manchester United and Chelsea. They were knocked out of the Champions League in the round of 16. Arsenal's long wait for silverware continued. As the 2010s wore on, Arsenal's decline became clearer. Arsenal's financial constraints were lifted slightly in the mid-2010s, but Wenger continued to rely on his trusted core, Mesut Ozil, Alexis Sanchez, and Santi Cazorla. The results were better, but titles were still elusive. Wenger's legacy was no longer about bringing Arsenal glory. It became about stability. But fans grew increasingly frustrated. They wanted more. After 22 years in charge, Wenger's reign finally came to an end in 2018. The Gunners bid farewell to their boss, their legend. Who would step in to restore Arsenal's pride? Who could lead them back to the top? After much speculation, Unai Emery was chosen to take over from Wenger. The Spaniard had done wonders with Sevilla, winning 3 consecutive Europa League titles, and was seen as a man capable of revitalizing Arsenal. His first season was a mixed bag. There were glimpses of progress, an impressive 7-1 win over Benfica in the Europa League and a thrilling 4-2 win over Tottenham in the Premier League, but also frustration. Emery's tactical flexibility was evident, but inconsistency haunted the team. Despite the presence of players like Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Alexandre Lacazette, and Mesut Ozil, Arsenal struggled defensively and found it difficult to break down top opposition. Arsenal finished 5th in the Premier League, just outside the Champions League spots, and had a disappointing defeat in the Europa League final to Chelsea. Despite reaching the final, Arsenal's performance on the night was far from inspiring, losing 4-1 in Baku. The pressure mounted on Emery as 2019-20 began, and his tenure was eventually cut short by November 2019 after a series of lackluster performances. His inability to fully connect with the squad and fans was clear, but his dismissal only brought more questions about Arsenal's future direction. December 2019, an exciting announcement: Arteta would be the new boss. The former Arsenal player was regarded as one of the brightest young managers in football. Having worked under Pep Guardiola at Manchester City, he had learned from the best in the business. But how was Arteta's first season? Well, it was full of highs and lows. There was the FA Cup win over Chelsea in 2020, in which Aubameyang produced a masterclass with 2 goals in the final. But there was also disappointing defeats, especially in the league. Arsenal finished 8th, their lowest finish in the Premier League era. He made some bold moves, such as dropping Mesut Ozil and trusting younger players like Bukayo Saka and Emile Smith-Rowe. The 2021-22 season started with significant setbacks, including a 3-match losing streak at the beginning of the season. Arsenal fans were worried. Was Arteta really the right man? But as the season progressed, the team showed improvement. However, despite improvements, Arsenal missed out on Champions League football in the final weeks of the season, finishing 5th after a heart-wrenching defeat to Tottenham. The gap was closing, but it still felt like a case of too little too late. Going into the 22-23 season, Arsenal were a team on the up. Arteta had spent several years building his squad, and now it was time for them to challenge the elite. But no one could have predicted just how competitive they would become. From the opening day, Arsenal were unstoppable. The attack was fluid, the defense solid, and the team played with a passion and intensity that had been missing for years. Saka, Martin Odegaard, and Gabriel Jesus were all playing at their best, and William Saliba proved to be a rock in defense. In the Premier League, Arsenal went toe-to-toe with Manchester City for the entire season. They led the league for most of the year, playing some of the most scintillating football in the world. The likes of Saka, Nketiah, and Trossard chipped in with key goals, while Partey and Xhaka offered defensive cover. But as the season wore on, Arsenal began to falter, suffering critical defeats to Manchester City and Brighton. Despite this, they still managed to finish second, securing Champions League football after 6 years. Arteta's project was clearly working. Fast forward to 2023-24, and Arsenal were once again firmly in the hunt for the Premier League title. With the squad deepened by smart signings, including Declan Rice, Kai Havertz, and Jurrien Timber, the team looked well equipped for the challenges ahead. Arsenal started the season strong, going unbeaten in their first few matches and showing that their experience from last season was paying off. But the question remained, could they outlast Manchester City? Could they finally break through? You know the answer. Manchester City claimed a historic fourth straight Premier League crown. Despite winning the same number of matches, Arsenal lost the league by 2 points. Only 2. Arsenal is riding high this season, sitting in second place in the Premier League, just 6 points behind leaders Liverpool after 24 games. Under Mikel Arteta, the team has shown significant growth. In recent weeks, Arsenal has been on fire, securing crucial wins that have boosted their confidence. A 3-1 victory over Manchester United was a standout, showing they can perform under pressure against top-tier teams. Then came a clinical 4-0 thrashing of Everton, where the attack was firing on all cylinders. The 1-0 win against Chelsea also displayed their defensive solidity, an important trait for a team with title ambitions. The biggest moment, however, came in the North London derby, where Arsenal defeated Tottenham 2-1, strengthening their grip on second place and sending a clear message to the rest of the league. What about the 5-1 victory over Manchester City? It was just amazing. It definitely humbled Holland. Eddie Nketiah has emerged as a crucial figure, stepping in with important goals and assists when needed most. In midfield, Martin Odegaard has been instrumental, controlling the tempo of games and creating opportunities for his teammates. Meanwhile, at the back, William Saliba has been a rock, ensuring that the defense remains as solid as ever. With this squad, Arsenal is firmly in the race for the Premier League title. Can Arteta's men stay consistent and finally end their title drought? Arsenal's return to the Champions League signals something bigger. They're ready to challenge Europe's elite again. Will this squad, led by Arteta, be the one to finally deliver the Champions League trophy? It's no longer a distant dream. It's within their grasp. The future is Arsenal's to take. Only time will tell. But one thing is for sure, the best is yet to come. What do you think? Will Arsenal finally bring the title home this season? Let us know in the comments.